Welcome to a deep dive into risk loss and all the psychology that goes with it, especially in financial markets. We got a great suggestion from you to take a look at Jim Paul's book, What I Learned Losing $1 Million. And wow, talk about a fascinating read. A commodities trader's firsthand account of going from crazy success to $1 million loss, with a lot of hard-won wisdom along the way.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like Paul doesn't just tell the story. He digs into like the why behind his decisions.
Yeah.
And it all seems to go back to his early life where it seems like he developed this like game mentality,
Hmm.
you know, sort of approaching life as a series of challenges to be conquered.
Yeah. From his childhood at a country club where wealth was like the ultimate measure of
Yeah.
success, to hustling as a caddy, and realizing he could make more money pitching nickels, it's clear that the how mattered less to Paul than what you get. Did you ever have a moment like that?
Yeah.
Where you realized the rules of the game, so to speak?
I think we all have those aha moments, you know, at some point along the way. For Paul, it seems like this mindset really took hold. It's like he applied it to academics, fraternity life. He even like outsmarted his economics professor.
Yeah.
It's like he just saw patterns and exploited them wherever he went.
Yeah, and that kind of takes us to his early career success, right? Landing this coveted brokerage job, not by being the most qualified candidate, but figuring out how to game the personality test they use for hiring.
Oh, yeah. The Minnesota Study of Values test. He really wanted to get that perfect butterfly score on the scattergram, so he figured out the right answers, even if they weren't the most honest.
Talk about strategic.
Hmm.
But it worked. And he quickly rose through the ranks, even got elected to the Chicago Mercantile Exchange's Board of Governors at just 33. Pretty impressive. But also maybe a little bit of a red flag.
Yeah. I mean, early success can be a double-edged sword. It builds confidence,
Mm.
but can also create this dangerous sense of invincibility,
Hmm.
especially in a field like trading where risk is constant.
Yeah, and that leads us to the trade that changed everything for Paul. The one that cost him $1 million. He got into bull spreads in soybean oil. Can you maybe explain what those are in simple terms for our listener?
Sure. A bull spread is basically a strategy where you're betting on the price difference between two futures contracts widening. So you think the price of one will rise more than the other. In Paul's case, he was convinced there was going to be a shortage of soybean oil. So he built up this massive position. Along with his network of contacts, he even convinced himself they were going to take down Richard Dennis, this legendary trader,
Yeah.
which probably fueled his overconfidence even more.
Yeah, he made a fortune at first, something like $248,000 in a single day, which probably just reinforced that whole game mentality. But then the market shifted, and his losses started piling up.
And this is where it gets really interesting psychologically. Instead of getting out, cutting his losses, Paul doubled down. He clung to his story about the soybean oil shortage, even though the market was clearly telling them otherwise.
Yeah. Classic denial. He was so sure he was right that he couldn't accept the possibility of being wrong.
And as the losses mounted, he went through the stages of grief, denial, anger, bargaining, just like you would with the loss of a loved one. It's like he personalized the loss, which made it even more devastating emotionally.
This distinction between external and internal loss that he makes in the book, it's really insightful, isn't it? The external loss is just the money. But the internal loss is how you internalize that loss, how it affects your sense of self.
Exactly. And in Paul's case, he was so attached to being right, to winning the game, that the loss became this huge blow to his ego, not just his bank account.
So how did he finally come to terms with what happened? What was the turning point for him?
Well, eventually the losses became so catastrophic that he had no choice but to face reality. He was forced to confront his own flawed thinking and the role his emotions played in his downfall.
Welcome back to our deep dive into what I learned losing $1 million. It's amazing how Paul's story resonates, even if you've never traded soybean oil in your life.
Right. That's the power of understanding human psychology. You know, these same patterns play out in so many areas of life. We all take risks, make decisions under uncertainty, and sometimes our emotions lead us astray.
Yeah, for sure. And Paul really digs into how to manage those emotions, especially in the context of risk. He kind of breaks down risk into these different categories: investing, trading, speculating, betting, and gambling. Have you ever thought about which category you fall into when it comes to your own risk-taking?
It's an important question to ask yourself. You know, Paul argues that most people don't clearly define their role, which can lead to inconsistent decision-making. Like if you don't even know if you're an investor or a gambler, how can you develop a sound strategy?
Right, that makes total sense. He also has this interesting take on diversification. Isn't that supposed to be like a good thing?
Well, it can be.
Yeah.
But Paul suggests that sometimes it's a way to avoid making tough choices. He quotes William O'Neill saying, Diversification is a hedge for ignorance. In other words, if you truly understand what you're doing, you don't need to spread your bets quite so thin.
Yeah. So it's more about having conviction in your decisions, not just hedging your bets out of fear.
Exactly. And this is where having a plan comes in. Paul is adamant that a predetermined plan is the only way to navigate the market's ups and downs, without letting emotions get the best of you.
So like having a set of rules for yourself so you don't make those impulsive decisions in the heat of the moment.
Precisely. And he actually flips the script on how most people approach risk. Instead of focusing on potential gains, he says you should start by defining your stop loss, like the point where you'll exit a trade to limit your losses.
That seems kind of counterintuitive. Most people, I think, want to know how much they could make, not how much they could lose.
Right, but that's how emotions get you into trouble. If you haven't defined your pain point beforehand, you're much more likely to ride a losing trade down, just hoping it'll magically turn around.
Oh, I see. So a plan kind of helps you stay objective even when the market is going haywire.
Right. And speaking of emotional turmoil, Paul has some really fascinating insights into crowd behavior and how it impacts financial markets.
Yeah, I'm picturing those chaotic trading floor scenes in movies, everyone yelling and waving their arms.
Well, it can be like that, but it's not always so literal. He talks about the psychological crowd, how even individual traders can get swept up in the collective mood, whether it's euphoria or panic.
Interesting. So how does this crowd actually, influence the market?
Well, he lays out these two models, the delusion model and the trend model. The delusion model describes how speculative bubbles form. Like, think about those hot tech stocks that everyone's chasing.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. Then what happens?
Well, first there's expectant attention. People are basically primed to see what they want to see, like quick profits. Then someone comes along with a compelling suggestion, why this stock is the next big thing.
And if enough people buy into that story, it becomes self-fulfilling, right?
Exactly. That's the contagion stage. People buy because everyone else is buying. It's pure FOMO, fear of missing out.
Yeah, makes sense. And then eventually that leads to acceptance, where the price keeps rising and people just believe it'll never end.
Until it does. That's where the trend model kicks in, which describes market corrections or crashes. It starts with affirmation. Everyone feels like a genius for getting in early. Then there's repetition. The price keeps rising, reinforcing the belief that this trend is unstoppable.
Okay. And then something happens, like a bad news story, or just a slight dip in the price.
And that triggers fear, which spreads like wildfire. People start selling, desperately trying to get out before the bubble bursts.
Leading to a full-blown panic.
Yeah, exactly. It's that same contagion from the delusion model, but in reverse. So whether the market is going up or down, crowd psychology plays a huge role.
So how do you protect yourself from this, crowd mentality? Is it even possible if everyone else is losing their heads?
Paul argues that a predetermined plan is your best defense. It helps you stay grounded when everyone else is reacting emotionally. It's about having your own criteria for buying and selling, not just getting swept up in the hype or the fear.
And this all ties back to that, expectant attention idea, right? We see what we want to see, especially when it comes to potential profit.
Exactly. Think about it. Have you ever been so convinced that something was going to happen that you only noticed evidence that supported your belief?
Oh, for sure. We all have those blind spots.
And in the market, those blind spots can cost you a lot of money. That's why Paul stresses the importance of seeking out different perspectives, challenging your own assumptions, and being open to the possibility that you might be wrong.
So even if you have a plan, you need to constantly be reevaluating it and adjusting based on new information.
Absolutely. A plan isn't a rigid set of rules. It's a dynamic framework that helps you navigate uncertainty and make more rational decisions.
Wow, this is some seriously deep stuff. It makes you realize how much of trading, and maybe even life itself, is about managing those internal battles between logic and emotion. Welcome back to our deep dive into what I learned losing $1 million.
You know, one thing that really struck me is how Paul talks about how the very traits that contribute to someone's early success can actually set them up for failure later on. It's almost like a paradox. Yeah, it's true. Think about Paul's game mentality, his ability to analyze situations, spot patterns, and exploit them to his advantage. That served him well early on in his career, but it also made him overconfident, too focused on winning, even when the rules of the game had changed.
It's like he got so good at playing checkers that he didn't realize the market had switched to chess.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. He was playing by the wrong rules, and he couldn't adapt. And that brings us back to the importance of having a plan. A plan helps you step back from the emotional roller coaster of the market. and make decisions based on like a predetermined set of criteria, not on gut feelings or the whims of the crowd.
So a plan is almost like a psychological anchor, keeping you grounded when the market gets turbulent.
Exactly. And Paul really stresses the importance of defining your exit strategy before you enter a trade, especially your stop loss, he says. The first loss is the best loss. By setting a limit on how much you're willing to lose, you're essentially taking emotion out of the equation and protecting yourself from those catastrophic losses.
That takes discipline, though, right? It's easy to say you'll cut your losses, but when you're actually in the trade, it's so tempting to just hold on, hoping things will turn around.
Oh, absolutely. That's why having that predetermined plan is so crucial. It's like making a pact with yourself before you get caught up in the heat of the moment. Think about it. Have you ever made a decision that you regretted because you were feeling impulsive or emotional?
Oh, yeah, for sure. We all have. But how do you translate that to something as complex as financial markets?
Well, Paul's advice is surprisingly simple. If breaking your plan leads to pain and anxiety, get out. That feeling of dread, that's your body telling you something is wrong.
So in a way, it's actually about listening to your emotions, but in a very specific context. It's not about letting fear or greed drive your decisions. It's about recognizing when those emotions are signaling that you strayed too far from your plan.
Exactly. And I think this is a really powerful takeaway for anyone, regardless of whether they trade in the markets or not. We all have those moments where our emotions get the better of us, where we make decisions we later regret. Paul's experience suggests that sometimes the smartest thing to do is to acknowledge those emotions, step back, and reassess the situation.
It's about having the humility to admit when you're wrong and the courage to change course.
Right. And that leads to another important point Paul makes. Learning to lose is just as important as learning to win. Losses are inevitable, especially in the markets. But it's how you handle those losses that determines your long-term success.
What do you mean by, like, learning to lose?
I mean, not personalizing losses, not letting them shatter your confidence or make you question your abilities. Instead, view them as opportunities to learn and improve your strategy.
He compares it to, like, paying tuition in the School of Market Experience, which I think is such a great analogy because it shifts your perspective from failure to an ongoing learning process.
Yeah, and it reminds us that even the most successful traders have losing trades. The key is to manage those losses, learn from them, and move on.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into what I learned losing $1 million, what's like the one key takeaway you hope our listener walks away with?
I think the most important lesson is the power of having a plan, a predetermined set of rules to guide your decisions and help you manage risk, especially when emotions are running high. And this applies to so many areas of life, not just financial markets, whether you're starting a business, investing in a relationship, or just making a major life decision. Having a plan can help you navigate uncertainty and achieve your goals more effectively.
Yeah, a plan doesn't guarantee success, of course, but it helps you approach risk in a much more conscious, intentional way.
Exactly. And it reminds you that you're in control,
Mm.
even when the market, or life in general, feels chaotic.
Well, this has been fantastic. Thanks for guiding us through this deep dive. It's been a truly fascinating journey into the psychology of risk and decision making.
My pleasure. Always happy to explore the deeper meaning behind these real-life stories.
And to our listener, we hope you found this exploration valuable. Remember, the key to success in the markets and in life isn't just about winning. It's about playing the game strategically, with awareness, discipline, and a plan that helps you stay grounded. Even when the world feels like it's spinning out of control,